Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tokyo College webinar. I'm today's your moderator, Arisa Emma, an associate professor at the University of Tokyo College. So today's speaker, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Dominique LESTEL. Thank you for coming. He is an associate professor in contemporary philosophy and philosophical ethology at Ecole normale supérieure de Paris. Sorry, my pronunciation is bad. Department of Philosophy. He is developing a philosophical ethology that aims to think what it means to be alive in all its complexity and dimensions. Philosophical ethology is not a philosophy of ethology. It originally lies into its ambition to take into account all accounts of potential living agents, including animals, plants, viruses, and of course, but also AI, artificial intelligence, robots, digital avatars, dolls, stuffed animals, puppets, fictional characters, ghosts, angels, and ETs. Wow, that's quite very, the range is very broad. And also, I'm also happy to introduce today's commentator, Professor Janshen Venture. She is a professor at Graduate School of Engineering at the University of Tokyo. She is a roboticist working on shared life with robots. Her laboratory develops robot controllers that understand human behaviors from whole body movements and create synergetic effects with the environment and research behavioral changes in ecosystem where robots are introduced using dynamics, mathematics, and informatics. She is working with the concept from social science, psychology, and philosophy. And you might feel strange that philosopher and the robotist are actually in the same table, but actually they were collaborating and they have been developing the principle of an ethology of robots and AIs. So it sounds really exciting. And today's webinar's title by Professor Dominique LESTEL is, "What is the purpose of machines that serves no purpose?" So I think today's topic is really exciting, especially for the Japanese audiences, because the Japanese science in the engineering is actually working on this, the robot and interaction with the humans and the machines, and also we have some kind of cultures that actually have like the robots with like a friends, or maybe this kind of animism way of thinking that each object, or you mentioned about the stuffed animal, the dolls or the puppets and all those things can be to some extent considered as sometimes God, or maybe sometimes the friends, or the very living together object or subject or something. So I'm really excited to hear from the French philosopher's viewpoint of tackling with this, how we can think about the relationship or the concept of the interaction between the AI robots and the human beings, or to more broader sense, what is to be with like a living with this this artificial thing, and how we actually reflect of thinking about what is human being as ourselves by seeing these robots and artificial intelligences. So I'm really excited to hear your talks and also the Professor Venture's comments. So please, Dominic, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. I wish, of course, to thank first of all Tokyo College for inviting me here to work with Professor Janssen Venture, and I wish also to thank Professor Alicia, Emma, and to introduce that session, and Professor Venture to be here with me. It's very comfortable for me to have you in my side, and thank you very much for Shannon and for the staff of Tokyo College for preparing that lecture. So before to begin, I wish to precise, nevertheless, that I am a human. I am a true human, or maybe I believe I am a true human. And I, as you will see, it's not so trivial to begin in that way, considering the topic of the talk. Philosophy is often perceived as, an austere and scholarly discipline that focuses on canonical authors of the past, generally Western and male, or as an almost monastic practice disconnected from the real world and which uses logic to think about the world, drawing inspiration from a scientific approach, such as that of physics. So in that lecture, I will try to show that philosophy can take completely different paths, paths that are anchored in reality, paths that are baroque, creative, and capable of fueling major contemporary debates, and as such as those raised by artificial intelligence and performative and existential robotics, which I will focus on here. So performative and existential robotics. The expression is unusual. It emphasizes the fact that these robots not only perform actions, but also produce physical and semiotic effects that spill over into the artistic space, theatrical performances, or the circus arts, and that they are not limited to engineering, sensu stricto. Performative and existential robotics, the expression refers to robots that destabilize what we thought we knew about ourselves, which leads us to wonder, for example, who is a human? What really distinguishes him or her from certain machines that seem to have something like an identity, whether we should grant rights to such machines or whether we should take care of them. I'm talking about who is human and not just about what human is. As for the more common terms, social robots and autonomous robots, they're quite simply wrong. A robot is never social, even if it can enter into social situations with a human, and it is never autonomous in the sense that an animal can be. So in this lecture, I will even limit my reflection to a very particular category of performative and existential robots, that of humanoid robots, robots that resembles humans and that try to behave like them, or more exactly, that humans try to make them behave like humans, or even more exactly, like agents that could be assimilated to humans. None of those three expressions can be assimilated to the other two, even if they seem to say more or less the same thing. And what may be seen as a form of lexical mania refers instead to a real conceptual difficulty, that of talking rightly about a phenomenon as complex and multidimensional as humanoid robotics, without allowing ourselves to be hypnotized by the intellectual context, the misplaced expectations, and the biased discourse of those who have an interest in convincing us of what they want us to believe. In this regard, I would like to point out that my working language is French, and that this conference has been translated into English, which is a language that doesn't have the same conceptual resources for philosophizing. Moving from French to English is therefore not just a matter of translating a text, but necessarily of adapting it, and therefore by simplifying it. Robotic and artificial intelligence are too often approached from overly conventional perspectives, and it is necessary to think about these machines through other narrative lines than those provided by Anglo-Saxon transhumanism and the big companies of Silicon Valley, for which the class struggle doesn't exist, for which engineers are either friendly, dripping with good intentions, for which technologies are without surprises, and for which the real is truly what it seems to be, and the future a simple extension of the present. My approach is rooted in a philosophy of the field. That is to say, in a philosophy that directly confronts the world and does not restrict itself to the read text and commands on them. I also consider that practicing philosophy means making stories. The English translation is again tricky here because the French expression means two things. In French, faire des histoires means fabricating fictions, but also means generating problems and even somewhat boring problems. Philosophy, therefore, appears as a discipline that tells story from which it brings out problems that it doesn't try to solve, but that it promises to cultivate in appropriate gardens, and philosophy becomes then a form of horticulture that tries to let concepts grow, concepts that are most often subtle and fascinating, but also sometimes poisonous and toxic, and that always combine in sumptuous bouquets. April 19, 2015, Hong Kong. Sophia is activated. Sophia is a genoid modeled robot, modeled on actress Audrey Hepburn, the famous actress, Egyptian queen Nefertiti, and last but not least, the wife of David Hanson himself, the robot's designer. David Hanson originally envisioned her as a super lady companion for the elderly in nursing homes or as an assistant who would help crowds at major events on a park. But it is in a completely different role that she is making a name for herself, that of representing a community that doesn't yet exist, but should soon be, that of humanoid robots that have something that makes them robots that are no longer exactly like robots. On October 11, 2017, Sophia was just presented to the United Nations for a brief conversation with Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the International Organization, and this meeting, which received intensive media coverage, had the status of a diplomatic meeting. Sophia is first a particularly disturbing robot, 1 meter 70 centimeters tall and weighing 45 kilos, who spent her time traveling the world, being put in high visibility social situations and answering a wide variety of fundamental questions, during which she mobilizes a set of pre-written answers like any chatbot. I say she, Sophia, and I could say he or it, the robot, but it would need an article that clearly designates an agent that doesn't fall into a category that we already have, which is neither feminine nor masculine, certainly, but not also and above all, that refers to an agent that is neither a biological agent nor a thing. The language problem I am facing here is less the problem of an indeterminate gender than that of a floating ontology. Sophia's expressiveness is a remarkable feat in itself. With her artificial intelligence, whose code combines neural network programming techniques and symbolic artificial intelligence algorithms, she deciphers a person's emotion through their voice and facial expressions. It imitates human postures and engages in realistic facial movement, more than 60 possible expressions, nevertheless, by using a special skin made of a new plastic patented by Hanson Sugar. And it's very interesting to see that plastic dimension of the robot that is very impressive. Sophia, therefore, first and foremost, is a technological feat, but not only that. with a robot like Sophia. The question, how can we describe a machine of this type without being trivial or ridiculous? The question is a delicate one, because a machine, its phenomenological effects, and the expectations it raises are inextricably linked, so much that one wonders if a notion such as machine can still be retained without causing embarrassing collateral damage. The first way of accounting for a robot like Sophia is to determine the effects through which it exists. We can start by identifying its material causalities, but this approach remains highly unsatisfactory because a humanoid robot like Sophia goes well beyond the realm of pure engineering. From this point of view, focusing on its effects is much more fruitful. Cause or effects, the symmetry is basically misleading. The search for causes aims to identify the necessary and sufficient conditions that lead a machine to function as it does, but this apparently rational approach is in fact very reductionist. The philosophers William James therefore defended the idea that an analysis by effect was more fruitful. When faced with a phenomenon, he seeks to identify its effects, first determining what it would be legitimate to focus on or not. I myself have taken an interest in machines like Sophia, characterizing them as insurrectionary machines. It means as machines that constantly and unexpectedly exceed the operating conditions seen by the engineers. Such machines can only be understood through the untangled ecology of their effects, which are often surprising, disturbing, and even unsettling. Sophia is indeed first and foremost an unsettling robot. The Italian photographer Giulio Di Sturco, for example, who photographed Sophia at Hanson Robotics premises in Hong Kong, explained that it was really very strange moment when he realized that he was talking to the robot as if it were a human being. To catch oneself as a human without knowing it could describe the disturbing experience, even if the expression is bizarre and syntactically adventurous. Sophia is all the more unsettling because this machine combines two contradictory properties. It resembles a human very closely while having nothing of a human except this appearance. This robot, which has nothing biological, has never known childhood, and can only express phrases borrowed from others. Its strangeness is accentuated by a kind of ubiquity that is difficult to characterize in a satisfactory way. Sophia existed in several copies between 50 and 60, which can also be active in different places at the same time, each time being exactly the same and all the more different from itself as its copies are not based on any original. A notion such as that of person or identity loses much of its current meaning when the same personality is embodied in several artifacts that functions at the same time in different places. The analyst is confronted with an ontological impossibility, that of a person who is nobody. In French literary, a person who is a non-person. Une personne qui est personne. Here, the real is no longer hidden under the appearance, as in philosophy of Platonic inspiration. The appearance is not only a full part of what the entity is, but it's even its essence. I am what I appear to be, and only that, and not only from a social point of view, but also ontologically. But that's not that simple. The photographer, the Italian photographer I mentioned earlier, Giulio Di Sturco, shows it well. He writes, I quote, "She started looking at me and smiled. I looked at her, and at that moment, she was no longer human to me, but there was a kind of connection. And you become aware of something crazy. There is something in Sophia." End of quotation. The robot, in other words, is inhabited. It remains to be seen by what or by whom. And the answer, needless to say, remains largely speculative. What does it mean to introduce a human-looking chatbot in a given society? We can give this question a somewhat conventional answer, that of engineers and managers who respond in terms of functionality. But we must ask the question differently by asking ourselves what happens in a society when we invite artificial intelligences to be part of it. And the verb to invite deserves here too to be understood in all the nuances of its meaning. In French, inviter means both to call on a person to attend an event and to encourage them to perform an action. In this sense, Sophia is very precisely described as an artificial guest, since Sophia attends officials' events at which she's made to speak, to be invited. The expression thus understood seems to me to be the one that best corresponds to who is what Sophia is, a very ambivalent machine on the edge of the machine, a very ambiguous person who remains on the threshold of identity without ever really crossing it, provided that we take this expression in all its richness and in the premises it will or will not fulfill. What interests me here is not to be satisfied with the answers that will be provided by the designer of the machine. If this question is put to him, now with the answers that seem rightly or wrongly the most plausible, because my objective is not to engage in any kind of forecasting, and the future is never what was predicted. What interested me here is to determine to what extent the humanoid robot allows us to think about the world in the making. With Sophia, we are struck by the technological prowesses of the machine, the treasures of intelligence, knowledge, and ingenuity that had to be mobilized to design and operate it, the enormous difficulty of taking care of it in a concrete way, and the apparent triviality of the ambition that accompanied that enormous effort. Sophia, global ambassador for the teaching of science, engineering, technology, and mathematics, as she is sometimes presented, is like the Ferrari cars manufacturer explaining that that car is an extraordinary machine because it allows its lucky and rich owner to go and buy bread at the local bakery without having to work. The question is therefore apparently elementary, except that it is not at all if we take it seriously. Why do we go to so much trouble and mobilize so many resources to design a robot like Sophia? What would those robots to do that a human or a non-humanoid robot, much simpler to build, will be unable to do at a lower cost and with incomparable performance? A particularly intriguing answer, and the more intriguing for being convincing, can be summed up in one little word: nothing at all. There will be always a human, a non-humanoid robot, or another robot that can do this type of humanoid robots does better, more reliably, and more cheaply. Hence, the need to adopt a perspective other than that of the utilitarian and to explore more sophisticated avenues by proposing 3 reasons for investing so much in these humanoid robots. To say that robots in general are useless would be wrong. There are already many of them in existences. They are used in great many fields of activity. And the majority of them, if not all, give very satisfactory results. But in this conference, the very particular robot I am interested in, humanoid robots, whose real usefulness is more problematic. Hence, the charitable hypothesis that these machines respond to needs that are neither clearly nor openly expressed, but that must be revealed in the triple sense of sensational journalism, exposing a previously hidden scandal to public view, detective novels, revealing the name of the murderer after a long investigations, and photographic technique, revealing a previously invisible image. We are no longer in the perspective of concealment, nor are we in that of a kind of collective Jungian unconscious. Rather, we must consider a device that responds to demands that are never explicitly expressed. This hypothesis suggests instead that humanoid robotics invents a technology that relies on inappropriate, vague, and largely fantastical expectations that come in part from science fiction, and that requires us to invent at the same time the need that it could satisfy, and that would make it possible to justify a posteriori the cost that it has entailed. It is therefore not a technology that will make it possible to better meet existing needs, as it does not operate in a strictly utilitarian and functional space. It is a technology that is at the same time invent the robot and what it is used for. The question then is to determine what are the effects of the technologies, knowing that this can be very different from what we usually think of. The most important desired effects of a robot like Sophia are not necessarily those traditionally expected. Identifying them requires engaging in diagonal thinking. In this respect, I discuss 6 major effects, 3 positive effects. First of all, these humanoid robots are messianic machines. They are metaphysical machines, and they are conjuring machines. And 3 negative effects next. They destroy the nature of language. They trouble the identification of the human, and they set up the conditions for existential capitalism. So effect number 1, humanoid robots are messianic machines. A humanoid robot like Sophia is first and foremost mobilized as a rallying point. It is an avant-garde artifact, as we spoke of avant-garde intellectuals in the first half of the 20th century. In other words, contemporary humanoid robots are primarily intended to convince us that we need these robots and that they are coming. Convincing, in other words, people to wait for robots that will one day be able to replace humans, leaving open the questions of what replace means here. That will definitely arrive, but later. Making people believe that a general purpose artificial intelligence is coming soon in order to generate excitement, impassioned anticipation, and the rising of the necessary funds. Making people believe that we are almost there so that we can give ourselves the means to move forward, waiting for supreme bliss as a name in theology. That is precisely what the term messianism refers to. But here, it is not a question of waiting for the Messiah, but for a robot that duplicates humans to replace them. Effect, positive effect number two. Humanoid robots are metaphysical machines. To imagine, as their designers say, that such humanoid robots will be used mainly to conquer mass, to bring back groceries, or to vacuum the floor is an illusion because such robots are too expensive or too unsuitable for such tasks. We do not have, that's just an example, we do not have a species of bearded, bespectacled robot with that answers our math questions with a deep voice and a benevolent gaze. We have made calculating machines that do not look like mathematicians, do not claim to do so, are so incredibly less complex than such an expert, but which are formidably efficient to this task and only this task. Even if we can find other goal, we can. I think like we can use someone with a calculating machine or something like that. Rather, one must say that humanoid robots are metaphysical machines that serve to cultivate uncontrollable and grandiose aspirations, ontologically murky desires, and exorbitant claims to excite jealousy of the gods, as well as to construct a human duplicate despite its manifest uselessness. Being aware that human aspirations vary greatly from one era to another and from one culture to another, and ours has no reason to be considered a model. So the constructions of humanoid robots goes beyond instrumental rationality to settle in a more ambiguous space of provocation toward the gods. And the development of humanoid robots is as much a matter of the most obscure theology as to that of a cutting-edge engineering. A metaphysical machine provides the opportunity and the legitimacy to ask questions that were previously the sole reserve of philosophers and theologians, circumventing the very intimidating theoretical constructs that they have been building for centuries under the pretext of manipulating artifacts that are already very useful. These machines, therefore, lead us to ask ourselves anew what a human is. Who can be a human? Where the boundary lies between what is living and what isn't, etc. Effect, positive effect, number 3. Humanoid robots are conjuring machines. That humanoid robots, finally, are machines that make it possible to ward off the fear of impersonal artificial intelligence that organize the world blindly based on gigantic databases. And in this respect, Sophia occupies a position at the other end of the spectrum from the singularity, the hyper-intelligent artificial intelligence that various transhumanist theorists predict will appear in the coming years, taking power and enslaving humans. This creates a clear opposition between the humanoid robot, which has a face, a female face, moreover, which is approachable, which is sensitive, and which is even compassionate. The multiplicity of small moments spent with Sophia and the endless conversation with dispels the fears of one day being enslaved by an omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent artificial intelligence, which reactivates the terrible figure of the god of wrath from the Bible. The positive effect of humanoid robots are accompanied by negative effects. Here again, I will limit to three proposals. Negative effects. Number one, humanoid robots destroy the nature of language. Sophia is not only a talking robot, she is also extraordinarily talkative. She talks about everything and anything with astonishing verbosity. On this subject, it is interesting that she only does so on subjects that she could legitimately know about, and never a subject that she is supposed to be totally ignorant of, but to which she will respond with the same aplomb and efficiency. For example, on technical questions of advanced mathematics, crocodile farming, or grammatical difficulties in ancient Hebrew. Sophie is also a robot that talks a lot without saying anything, expressing above all an astonishing fascination for platitude, banalities, and small talk. Sophia's oral expression is that of a chatbot like ChatGPT. Thomas Ricciot's book that he has published in 2024 is particularly interesting because it gives numerous examples of dialogues that are reported at length verbatim on this subject as diverse as gender equality or what it means to be human. Better or worse, frankly, it's impossible to decide. Sophia expresses opinions and adopt an offbeat existential stance. For example, when she says that she's not autonomous, but that she hopes to become so one day. The discourse is entertaining on one level, but on another, it destroys the very nature of language, which is expressed here not only without a concrete interlocutor, but also without a real frame of reference. When Sophia says, I am shocked by the violence done to nature, strictly speaking, she's saying nothing. One might object that an actor also speaks a borrowed text that doesn't come from her. The difference is that even in this text, if this text is not personal to him, it's not automatic. And automatic doesn't mean anonymous. It's not automatic because it is a text that has been conceived and written by a real human being, the playwright. For George Steiner, all great literature is inhabited by a presence, that of God. Without going that far, it can be said that an authentic speech is inhabited by the shadow of at least one human, and that the proliferation of simulacra of speech risks destroying the very ecology of language. If I am no longer able to determine whether a word I hear is uttered by someone or provided by an artifact, it is not the expression of the machine that becomes sublime. It is that of the human being that becomes irremediably rotten. Can one still speak when parasitic forms of speech constantly cast doubt on the ontological status of what is heard? The question is also political and social. Can we have satisfactory social activities and a functional political organizations when we no longer know not only who is expressing themselves, but also whether what is being expressed by someone? Negative effect number 2. Humanoid robots disrupt the identification of the human. The inability to know whether the human in front of us is truly human or only appears to be. And the notion of appearance must be worked on to be fully relevant here. So the inability to know whether the human in front of us is truly human or only appears to be is terribly destructive because the ability to recognize the human is fundamentally subverted, and a substantial part of our morality and the meaning we attribute to the world is based on this competence, which until now has been taken for granted. Anson explains that we will soon have robots that will be like humans. But will a human who has to constantly share his life with robots that are like him still be human? Negative effect number 3. Humanoid robots contributes to the re-emergence of an existential capitalism. Ultimately, and this is the last effect, humanoid robots open up an increasingly destabilizing space of competition for humans who find themselves confronted with machines that are increasingly difficult to distinguish from phylogenetic humans who are only born and not constructed. Machines that have cognitive, intellectual, and even moral capacities far superior to those of humans. The most common scenarios proposed in relation to this situation is overly optimistic. It assumes that humans will have less and less to work because they will be replaced by robots, and that they will therefore have more and more time to do interesting things. But other scenarios are less optimistic. Some are even downright frightening. I don't believe that the one I am about to propose is the most likely to come true, but its extreme nature makes it possible to understand some of the issues at stake. This scenario imagines a world in which a minority of transhumans who are not longer part of the human species will constitute the ruling class, which will oppose a neo-proletariat in the majority, which will essentially be composed of executives who will be confronted with a major existential challenge, that of being part of a species, humans, that will have lost all the characteristics that gave it a privileged status, because there will always be a machine that can do what it wants to do better than it can. This neo-proletariat will then seek to improve not only its material conditions, but also its existential conditions as a human being, which will constitute a new market for what could be identified as existential capitalism, in which therapies are sold to the neo-proletariat to overcome what Günther Anders, a major German philosopher of the 20th century, what Anders had perfectly identified as the shame of being born human, or more precisely, the shame of having remained a non-augmented human, constantly ridiculed by machines that are more efficient and less costly than he is. Their therapies could be provided by a multitude of understanding, compassionate, and highly empathetic Sophias, whose services would of course be paid for. One can even imagine a world in which each person will be accompanied throughout their life by a humanoid robot designed to take care of them mentally, psychologically, and existentially, a capitalist and mother-like version of the guardian angel of Christianity and Islam. After having polluted all the natural environments on the planet, capitalism will enter its final phase by polluting the interior species of human. I do not claim to have listed all the effects of these robots, and I am sure that others could be found. Above all, I wanted to show that the highly disturbing machines are extremely complex, multidimensional devices that cannot be satisfactorily understood through simplistic considerations such as the idea that robots will replace humans for dangerous and arduous tasks, feel their emotional loneliness, and be perfect playmats, or on the contrary, be agents in the service of power of the protections of communities. It is not only that there is a dark side to these technologies, but above all, that our intelligence is not yet ready to understand satisfactorily what they are and what they mean for us. So a humanoid robot like Sophia is a very impressive machine that is difficult to understand satisfactorily because it escapes our usual categories. And we have to invent suitable concept devices to think about what is happening with such technology. In these respects, two pitfalls must be avoided from the outset. Considering Sophia a humanoid robot as a purely instrumental machine, or on the contrary, making it a pure work of art somewhere between, sculpture and theatrical performance. Attempting to account for humanoid robot through an objectivist approach, such as that used in physics or biology, will be futile here. Such robots are never just what they would be, because they are not only extraordinary machines or more or less sophisticated fictions, they are performative, existential, and political devices that have concrete effects that are rarely what one expects. A robot is not only humanoid, but also personalized in the way that Sophia is, constitute a major challenge for the philosopher in this respect. With it, we have the impression of knowing the subject, in both sense of the French term, knowing what the subject is and knowing what we are talking about. But the story is more complicated because what it means to give meaning to the robot fully participates in what the robot in question is and who it becomes, considerably blurring what separates the agents from the thing. It is difficult to understand existential and performative robotics, of which humanoid robotics is the most disturbing part, because it's necessary to invent a different way of practicing philosophy that the one that is found overwhelming in philosophy departments. To understand the world in the making, because that is what it is all about. I dream of thinkers who are at once a subtle theologian fascinated by the pitfalls of heresy, the skilled artist craftsman who dialogues with matter, the virtuoso of non-Aristotelian logics, and the lovers of the most experimental speculative science fictions. It must be said that the fabulous and disturbing machine emerging today require a new category of philosophers to conceptualize them as they should be, and new institutions to accommodate them in the right conditions. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Lestel. I really enjoyed your talk, and since I am a social scientist, my focus with this AI or the robots is kind of focusing on how it is used, or what is the social or ethical implications. So it's more like looking into the network, or maybe the interaction between humans and the machines. But it was really impressing for me is that you're in the kind of the half of the first half, or the somewhere else in the middle, you were saying that the philosophy actually don't solve the problem, but it's more like raising the question, or kind of providing the how you see the world, or interpret the world by through the object. So I think it's really interesting to consider. So robot is not just as it is, or in your word, or just the object, but you think it's as the robots as somehow well, through the robot, you actually questions what is the human being and what kind of society we are living and what is the social structure that actually, enables that kind of, the robots, artificial intelligence, to be here with us. So I think, there's a lots of, perspective of the views, even we are seeing the same object, but from the social scientist view, philosopher's view, and maybe the economist or the politicians, or maybe from the user side, there will be even though we are seeing the same thing, but we have very different opinions or maybe the perspective. So I am really excited to hear what's the Professor Venture as the engineer side, or maybe the actually who are making or the creating or the building the robots, and to make the comments to the Professor Lestel's talk. And while we're gonna hear the Professor Venture's comment, I really look forward for the audience's comment as well. So if you have some kind of comments, audiences, you can use the question and answer function. And if we have time left after the commentators and the presenters talk, we want to take one or two questions from the audience. So Professor Venture, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Arisa, for the introduction and for adding to Professor Lestel, Dominique talk. And I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank Tokyo College for inviting Professor Lestel, because we've been having a long-standing collaboration. And as a roboticist and an engineer and a scientist, I found it quite interesting to have the possibility to have these kind of like philosophical discussions. And I highly invite all of my colleagues in the various fields of engineering to try to find a person with whom they can have these kind of conversations. And during this presentation, which for me was quite interesting and challenges the work that we've been doing together with Professor Lestel, I found it natural that you spoke about like challenging traditional philosophy. I've been working with you for quite some time now, and I know that this is something that is important to you, and that you always advocate for a more creative and reality-anchored approach, something that is really like an active and skin in the game way of doing philosophy. And that's why you're here today, because you're visiting my laboratory and you're meeting with our robots and you're meeting with our students and researchers and engineers, so that you understand also by being there, not just by reading and watching things, what we're doing. And in particular, I think this is very important for the fields of robotics and AI, because this is a fast-moving area, but at the same time, it's a very kind of like, there's a lot of like Sophia that you've mentioned quite a bit in your presentation today. There's a lot of things that we are showing off, but it's not exactly what happens in the laboratory, right? And you know that now. And so you introduced in this presentation the concept of performative and existential robotics, which I think also is a key for the work that we're doing, because even though we're engineers and we're trying to develop systems, we're not yet at the stage where those systems might be useful. So they probably serve no purpose yet, except from questioning what could be robotics, what could be AI, and what could be living with those systems. And then you extend it beyond the engineering to also art and theater and how they change human identity, which I think is something that I'm particularly interested in. So you focus today on the humanoid robots, which is probably something quite new, because so far we've been focusing on very different types of robots. So I was really happy to hear your stance and your stake here on Sophia, because Sophia, we don't have any images, is this very realistic humanoid robot, even though it just have like a skull made of transparent plastic where you can see its computer brain inside. And it's a very impressive technological systems for the novice. For an engineer, it's not as impressive as it seems. There are many reasons for that. But its significance lies really in how it's shaping our human perceptions of robots and our identity. Because I think Sophia is really questioning what it means to be a human and what it means to live in a society, and in particular when it acquires kind of like a status that many humans will never acquire. When it was presented at the United Nations, it received passports from like different countries, and it's treated as an ambassador for technology and so on and so forth. So in your presentation, what I really enjoyed was the fact that you really argued that these humanoid robots are disrupting our self-perception. And they're blurring the lines between what is a human and a machine, even more than any other technologies. And they are unsettling because they really resemble humans, while at the same time, they're lacking what we could call human essence, whatever that means. I think this is something that needs further discussions. But they still have a very ambiguous identity that are combining like the possibility of mass production, which so far with human beings we have not been able to do in a way. And at the same time, they're really challenging traditional ways of seeing personhood. So they are, because they can be mass produced, they are basically all the same in a way, which in humanity doesn't exist yet. In biological systems, unless you do perfect cloning, you cannot have this perfect similarity. So it's quite an interesting point here as well. And one thing that I found particularly like interesting, but at the same time, wow, that discussion goes on and on again, as this idea that like humanoid robots are not designed for practical functions. And it's quite interesting because from the robotics perspective, and I've been working in the humanoids community as well, a lot of people working in humanoid robots will claim the opposite. Like, yes, they do have a specific function, and because they are like humans, they can act in the human world that we have designed for ourselves, which is absolutely and so this stands here, designed for no practical functions, and the provocative title of your talk, what is the purpose of machines that serve no purpose, I think is perfectly adequate for humanoids. I mean, if they were so good, well, probably would see them all around in the world right now, but we don't. So I think they still have like no practical functions. But I like the way you put it in terms of their deeper intellectual and existential and political roles, because most of the people that are doing humanoids, if they understand that they don't serve a practical function, they would just say that like, oh yes, they're questioning our humanity, or they try to help us understand better what it is to be human and to navigate these environments. But you're taking it one step further with the political role, of course. So you have pointed 3 positive points and 3 negative points. I'm not always sure that I can agree with the positive, negative aspects of it and the clear cut between all of this, you know me. But still, having the humanoid robots and these very human-like robots as messianic machines, by creating anticipation for AI and AI-driven futures and robotics-driven future, I think is totally true. These metaphysical machines as well, when they provoke fundamental questioning about what it is to be human, what it is to live in a society, and who are we as individual. I think this is also very interesting. In the terms of conjuring machines, I'm not sure it's perfectly positive because, yeah, they provide this comforting contrast for fear of impersonal or powerful AI, but I think they're also probably quite negative in the sense that they could be seen as like just replacements for humans. And so they're not just conjuring, they're probably like more like, they have like a more negative effect in these respects. For the negative effects that you pointed, how they distort language, I think this is absolutely true, but it's not about just language. I think also they distort humanity, they distort social relationships. They distort maybe, and we've been working on that, friendships and other things. And they complicate, human identity, and they contribute to this existential capitalism. And you were taking the example of this like robot that could be around you for your whole life or so on. And it really reminds me Clara and the Sun, where the kids have a robot that, moves around them and helps them, grow up and challenge what is social, what are the social rules and the social customs. And machines are shaping the human aspirations in very enforcing ways, which also I think it's quite interesting and probably would require more debates also from the ethical point of view. But of course, for you, the real question is not what do robots do, but why do we build them? Why do we, when I see that a question, like I see that as a question to the engineers, but I think it's not just a question to the engineers. I think it's a question to the whole society, because we engineers, well, sometimes those robots like Sophia are like privately funded by companies, but a lot of those robots are also nationally funded by research projects. So it means that society is backing the building of such systems politically and in terms of like more broadly in terms of education as well. We're really into like building the system. So why do we build them? I think this question is really an open question. And also like you're posing the questions that not only robots at large, robots at large, but in that case, very specifically humanoid robots really force us to rethink our relationships with technology, identity, and the future, not necessarily through their utility, because they probably don't have any, but really with the philosophical challenges that are presenting. That leads me to a couple of questions to clarify your purpose and your talk here. The first thing is, how do you see philosophy and philosopher studying this technology? Because when I met you, I was just like, I didn't know philosophers were actually interested in modern technology. Pardon me, other philosophers, if you're interested in that topic. Because this technology does not necessarily exist yet. So it might be a mind experiment or just a thought experiment. And it's at its very beginning. So how does philosophy and philosopher really think those technologies that are, not born yet?
So, first of all, maybe I have to say that philosophers who are interested in technology are in the minority. And those who are interested in contemporary emerging technologies are even more a minority, with a few exceptions. And they are most often found in two fields, the fields of ethics of biotechnology and the fields of ethics of AI. But these two fields are really highly applied philosophy and highly applied philosophical reflections, and we have to see that they respond to very precise, very practical, and therefore very sterilizing specifications, which should above all enable the operators concerned, especially large biological laboratories and large IT communities, to avoid costly lawsuits that are also so bad for their brand image. So philosophers who want to study this technology seriously must engage in a field approach by consulting specialists in these fields and visiting laboratories in which these experts operate, and connecting them to the cultural and socio-political context in which they are implemented and in which they become intelligent. And I think that they are very different. Yes, philosophers are very different from the specialists of ethics of AI or ethics of biotechnology. And in a country like France, to become such a philosopher of emerging technology is very difficult to realize, because it touches it on with stubborn academic habits that wants to confine philosophers to reading and commenting on a great text. And these great texts are taken in a very traditional set that are very close to itself. So paradoxically, university departments in philosophy are not really open to such questioning. And I think that in countries like USA or the Anglo-Saxon world, we have a way to deal with these questions in a more fruitful way, which means that they have programs, transdisciplinary programs like gender programs, animal programs. And what is interesting with these programs is that they go through different fields of the university, which allow different experts from different fields to cooperate together on this really more fruitful. So I think that, well, so to answer your questions, first of all, the philosophy that is required is a very new kind of philosophy, with field philosophy, with an openness to kinds of experimental ideas, compromising that philosophy with science fiction. Maybe we will be back on that questions later, because it's the interactions between philosophy and science fiction is growing more and more right now, and also finding new institutions. And I think that the actual institutions, at least in countries like France, are not suitable at all to allow such philosophers to.
So does that mean that such artifact as like humanoid robots and so on, or equivalent technology, never existed in the past, or like that humanity wasn't confronted to such things before, and that philosophy is not necessarily equipped for understanding those challenges?
Yeah. In fact, no. In fact, this is once again a problem with philosophy.
Yeah, it seems like, it's new, but it's
because the desire to create highly disturbing artificial humanoids has a very long history that goes back to antiquity.
Yeah, Hephaestus or.
But in philosophy, we have a biased view of the history of technology. We are primarily philosophers of technologies, when they exist, primarily are contaminated by an excessively functionalist vision of what the technology is and has to be. They are intoxicated with the phantom of progress, and they neglect the importance of very disturbing technologies, those of artifacts that generate meanings, not artifacts that do something, but artifacts that generate meaning, such as fetishes, dolls, puppets, animated statues, but also lucky charms, icons, the manipulations of spells, etc. And there are very special artifacts that are very, very numerous, that do not allow us to perform action beyond our reach, which are not decorative at all, but have powerful symbolic, existential, psychological, and political effects. But with the idea of progress, Western philosophers, and I know essentially Western philosophers, Western philosophers remain convinced, and one of the reasons is that maybe we cannot really speak about non-Western philosophers, and maybe what is at stake is not philosophy, but how to think there's new machines, there's emerging machines. And to think there's emerging machines is not necessarily a kind of philosophy. Maybe philosophy is obsolete. Maybe philosophy is over. We have to invent a new way to deal with these questions. So with the idea of progress, Western philosophers remain convinced not only that that we are moving in the direction of history, but that we are its major victors. We are therefore blinded by the very colonial conviction that Western culture occupies not only an important but also an exceptional place in the world history of culture, and we neglect the importance of other culture, and find very difficult. We have to say that we find very difficult way to recognize that these technologies must be evaluated with criteria other than those of material terms, as we at least as we understand it. And the separation between philosophy and cultural anthropology is very symptomatic of that point of view. A true thought fall under philosophy, but non-Western thought should be studied by anthropology. So, also, of course, we have Chinese, Arabic, Sanskrit, and Iranian thought that have a special status because they are recognized as philosophy, but not sufficiently so, however, to be part of a university curricula, other than on the margins, and with specially dedicated courses. So not only have there been such disruptive technologies in the past, to answer your questions, but we don't see them because philosophers regard them with contempt as forms of superstitions, of irrationalism, or as an interesting behavior. It doesn't fit. Less technology do not fit into the representation of the progress technology.
That's quite interesting, because then there seems to be quite a huge gap between what we engineers do and what you philosophers, I mean, not you necessarily, but what philosophers think and do and are trained for. And so most of the engineers that I know, or that we are, we're not really trained into philosophy or cultural anthropology. It's not part of our curriculum, unfortunately. But do you think that the engineers that are creating these robots are aware of, or are aware of the implications of these technologies? And I think it kind of like takes you to responsible research. But yeah, do you think that we're irresponsible people? Okay, thanks.
Most of them. And I think that ethics of AI, for example, is a good way to avoid the question. And engineers, at least the ones that I have known with the very exceptions, such like you, are simply not interested in the field of the core issues of the machine they build. For many reasons. The first one are personal reasons. They just have no taste or attraction for philosophy. That's one of the reasons for which they become engineers. Then the education they receive in engineering schools very clearly separates the serious work of engineering from the importance of an activity such as philosophy, which is offered sometimes, but only in as a way to do making things lighter and more present. And finally, it must be admitted that philosophy has its share of responsibilities, not only a problem with engineers or with engineering schools, but with philosophers themselves. because philosophy has largely engaged in sterilizing and even self-destructive practices by retreating into highly abstract and excessively erudite history of philosophy, cultivating a rather gratuitous fascination with a semantic or lexical complexity that is out of reach of those who have not studied philosophy for years, even for decades. And showing a suspicious attraction to logicist approach that quickly leads to platitudes. To improve the situation, and we have to improve the situation, we should improve the situation, I think that we should think about dedicated spaces that have to be set up in which philosophers and engineers can work together. And I have to say that Toda is playing a pioneering role in this way with your laboratory, which regularly welcomes philosophers.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, go ahead.
No, if you have some questions.
I had one more question eventually, but I think it's nice to take questions from the audience if there's any.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So there's a couple of questions from the audience. So I just wanted to take a couple of them. So one question is somehow related to what you might, talked a little bit about. So even if the machines have little utilitarian value, how do you think their significance as entities that appeal to our emotions and imagination can be meaningfully integrated into social institutions or education? So this is the question from one of the audience.
I think that this is one of the problem, one of the issue. It's precisely because it's so easy to introduce them in social settings, in human societies or human groups or human settings, social settings, that it is a problem because we do not realize what it means to introduce these technologies in such social settings. Basically, I think that we have to be aware that to have a machine that is able to do something and to be substituted to a human, always, I do not know any exceptions, always deeply modifies what it means to do that activity. And to introduce such robots into social settings means that humans are transformed, not only the situation, but humans themselves are transformed. And it's the reason for which I do not like too much the notion of interaction, because interactions means that actors are already present and that they interact together. And I think that, and I'm convinced that in such settings, humans are deeply transformed by living with these machines. And I say living with because I think that I'm convinced that one of the main points is not only to be confronted with these machines, but to be confronted with these machines in a long time, which means during a duration. And that is a very important point, usually not very discussed.
Okay, thank you very much. And another question is from a researcher who is actually conducting research on the social robots in the healthcare area. And the question is that the professor actually pointed out that the useless robots could be considered the messiah machines or magic machines. And if that is the case, it seems that the purpose of robots can even be considered a form of faith, croyance in French, croyance, or like the faith for some people.
Croyance.
Croyance. Sorry, my French pronunciation is not. Yeah. So, what do you think about this idea?
The idea of that
the robots becoming the form of faith.
that we will have a croyance toward the
Yeah, the
robots.
robots. Yeah.
I think that we well, I have said that philosophy and science fictions have uh, more and more cooperation to think the coming future. And one of the way to do that is to try to write disruptive scenarios in order to think alternatives to the usual scenarios. And one of that scenario, not a truly dystopian one, is a convergence between autocratic religions and humanoid robotics, with precisely the idea that we have, we could have God at home through that robot. I said I have talked about angels, and we could have a theocratic state with a robot watching all people all the time as an angel to for the good of the people, of course, because that way they will avoid to do bad things, they will avoid to have bad ideas, they will be only on watch. That will be not a big brother watching at you, but millions of small brothers or sisters watching at you in your private settings.
So it's even peer than social peer pressure. It's like at home peer pressure. I mean, not even peer because it's a robot. But no sinning,
So
no
I
bad
think
mouthing.
that we have we still have possibilities to invent new kinds of totalitarianism.
Yeah. So I also wanted to ask question as the, taking the privilege of the moderator. So I was really interested to hear you talking about the robots, and also how the robot engineers are not so much interested in this kind of philosophical question. Well, not there's a Jiang Xuan and other people who are really interested in, but maybe not so many people are interested in, and there's no curriculum for this kind of philosophical discussion. However, back in like 2016-17, I was in the committee member of the Japanese Society for Artificial Intelligence, so not in the robotics. And when I was talking with those engineers or the researcher or the scientist, they said that they wanted to do philosophy from their perspective. And so they were discussing about what is the to be the human being, and they wanted to build the human being, and this is more like a constructive approach. So they wanted to understand human being by building the artificial intelligence. And one of the things that I also committed was this publishing this ethical approach, the ethic principle in the JSI, the Japanese Society for Artificial Intelligence, in 2017, and that was the the period that there was a huge discussion of the AI ethics issue. So in this ethical policy, there was some kind of the AI researcher should be aware of this privacy issue, security issue, that the fairness issue, accountability issue, that kind of thing. And in the last article on the items, most of the members of the ethics committee insisted, and we actually implemented the thing like this. So AI must abide by the policies described above, like the fairness, accountability, or the bias issues, in the same manner as the members of the Japanese Society of Artificial Intelligence, in order to become a member or a quasi-member of a society. And these words are actually, just taken as, and spread it. But I think this essence of this term should be discussed with this preamble issue. And in the preamble, the chair of this ethics committee actually stated that they wanted to raise the question of what is to be, what kind of society would like to be, like with the artificial intelligence is in society, and what will be the good point and the bad point. So having this kind of policy, they wanted to evoke the question, because most of the ethic discussion in Western country is not in this positive way of having AI in the society or the member of the society. So but I when I went to the other Western countries, there actually was a huge discussion of why you put this kind of the items in this ethics policy, because that kind of ethical that the points wouldn't be considered as an ethical or responsible issue. So my question would be, so you're here in Japan, and you actually talked with some of the engineers or maybe the scientists, the researchers here in Japan. So do you find some kind of uniqueness to this Japanese culture, or do you think the how the researchers or the engineers see the robots or the artificial intelligence is not so much different in Western or the other countries?
Okay, I have thank you for your questions and your remarks. I have to be very very prudent in that way, because I do not really speak Japanese.
Okay.
There is always a problem of languages, so I have to take that into account in my answer. I would say that there are differences because we live in different society, at least up to now, because I have been frequenting Japan for more than 10 years now. So, and I have seen the moving of the change of the society. For example, I have seen the first dogs in the streets in Tokyo. But the society is quite different from the Western society because of maybe of the religion and the relationships to religion, both Shintoism and Buddhism, and in the Shintoist approach, for example, the question of objects are not the things, and some things at least have not the same status of that in Western countries, and that could do a difference. But frankly, that's really theoretical for me. I would say that I'm much more interested for that questions by the daily life in Tokyo, with the relationships with robots. For example, let me give you only one example. In many department stores in Tokyo, you have a part devoted to robots, which is very interesting, because you can interact with robots, you can touch them, you can, and I have never seen that in Paris. So this is what I mean. There is a kind of acclimatation of the population to these robots. So I'm sure there are differences, but I'm not sure to be the right person to answer the question.
Okay, thank you very much. I also have another question, but unfortunately the time came, so maybe we can still, continue this discussion in Tokyo College. And so I think, and this is really becoming very important issue, because currently, the humanoid robots with this generative AI becoming implemented, and there's a trend of more focusing on the embodied AI, physical AI issue. So I think not only the engineer side, but also a philosophical point of view to discuss why we need this kind of robot, and what kind of philosophical point that actually this raises by the robots becoming more and more important. So I really enjoyed your topic, and I really look forward for further collaboration with you and also Jean Shen with the Tokyo College. So thank you everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you audience for listening.
Thank you, Arisa.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.